Welcome to the Relationships Inside Out podcast with Doctors Gregory Siebert and Kimberly Murray, licensed marriage and family therapists. Join them on this journey as they explore the ins and outs of relationships.
Welcome to Relationships Inside Out, where this episode we're going to talk about friendships, or friendships, as some would like to call it.
It can get a little complicated depending on who you're talking to.
And the definition of that is, different for everybody. What does that look like? What are we okay with? To what extent are we willing to put effort into that relationship? What do we want it to look like?
You can get gray, right? If it's we think of friendships as typically platonic. And if we breach that barrier, get a little gray, right? But the question is, especially for adults, what does a friend look like? Right? It's not gonna be the same as when we were in high school and we hung out every single day and it was easy to meet people.
That's what I want, though. That's what I want.
You want someone to come over every day?
Or I have neighbors who in the backyard, they cut their fence down and they hang out all the time.
Well, that's cool.
So that's what they wanted, right? That's great. Yeah.
You better like the next neighbors that come in. Each friendship can look a little different, even by person. So I can think of a handful of my friends, and each one of them varies in what we connect over, how much time we spend, all the things.
And that's a question I find myself asking is, in what capacity do I need this friend? So are they a friend that I just do X with, like say, I don't know, some hobby?
Sure.
Or is this a friend that I want to involve in more family stuff? Like, to what degree do I want them into my life? And that varies from friend to friend, and maybe history plays a role in that, or maybe just how you jive, or
even thinking about like vulnerability. How open do I want to be with them? Do I want to share, like, if my marriage is facing a challenge or family challenges, or is that not good for this particular friendship?
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of important questions we can ask ourselves about friendships, especially I think in early adulthood and late adulthood. It's really hard to find friends.
Yes, it is.
And I think about kind of the area where I'm at, where there's a lot of transition. People are having kids and some people aren't. And there's just a lot of split of where's the time, where's the expectations, are these expectations being met? Because you could have some good friendships that are there, and then life happens, and say they have a kid, and then their priorities change, and rightly so. And so, what do you need that reciprocity? Are your needs going to be met from that relationship, or do you need another friendship?
Think about when we had our second, even. We had friends that lived in our neighborhood, and with having our second, it's like we became a leper. Like all of a sudden they didn't want to hang out with us because they're kidless. And we went from having a school age-ish kid to now also having a newborn.
Yeah.
And what did that mean for our friendship, right? Like I didn't expect our friendship to change, but for them, it did, because they weren't in that stage of life or whatever it might be.
Yeah. And I had this couple friend that they have a child, but they won't travel anywhere. They won't do anything. Anywhere? They won't leave. No, they absolutely won't. Right. So you can tell in my tone that this is not a friendship. It's going to last.
That's insane.
And there's not much reciprocity. So I was just honest with myself. And I said, you know what? Like, I understand where they're at. That makes sense. That's what they choose. But a big thing that I think we should talk about, what comes up for me, is I have a value system, and how they're deciding to do that does not align with my values. Now, that's not saying what they're doing is right or wrong. It means it doesn't fit with like myself and who I am and how I value spending time. And so that's not a relationship that's going to last, because there's not reciprocity. There's not a need being met there. And for me, one of big need is reciprocity. I need to see that effort.
And value system here, I want to point out, it can coincide, but it's also different than like our values in terms of politics, faith, these kinds of things. It's values in relationship.
Yeah. And I would say even some global values, like, for example, I have a value of people being courteous. I want to know people are at least thinking of those around them, and they're not just going through life of screw it. Like, I don't really care. Get out of my way.
Truth.
Like, I want to see people be like, oh, let me hold the door for you, or
have empathy, compassion.
Let them go first. And I love that. And when I don't see that, it causes distress for me. And I'm like, oh, can't trust that person. Don't like that person. Right. So that's like a really good barometer for me when I'm establishing friendships. I'm like, that's not somebody I want. That's a value that I want for myself. And granted, we're not expecting perfection here, right? There's times where I'm like, not having a good day.
What? You have bad days?
And so, yeah, it's like looking at this
Yeah.
over time. It's not just like one time they were rude.
Because we all have those moments.
Yeah.
But it's a general pattern. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. There was a friend I had that we were eating. I had leftovers. We were eating out in the city, and I gave my leftovers to someone who was homeless. And he scoffed at me.
Why?
Yeah, I don't know, but it did not meet my value system. Right. Like to not.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's just things like that, the little things that add up, and then I have to reassess. And granted, it's always never just one thing, unless it's huge, right? Like they violated some like huge boundary or something.
With the reciprocity, to me, goes mutuality, and they kind of go hand in hand. But mutuality in effort, mutuality in interest in this relationship. If I'm always the one that's texting, calling, reaching out, it gets exhausting. Now, granted, there's seasons in which I'm going to be that friend, and there's seasons like when my kids are really little, I'm not that friend. I'm a pretty shitty friend, to be honest, because it's a hard stage for our household.
Yeah.
As it is for a lot of parents. Some people will manage it better than others, and I am not one of them. But by and large, when we boil it down, do we both care about each other's interests? Do we both acknowledge that if someone's having a bad day and we reach out? Do we both give support? But feeling like we're both in it together, we're both putting in energy. It's not just one-sided, so to speak. Yeah.
And the expectation that it's not going to be perfect and that you can communicate about it would be important.
The ebb and flow. Another one to me is trust, right? Trust doesn't necessarily mean the same as it would mean for my husband. I hold him to a higher caliber as my partner, but trust that they're honest with me. Trust that they have my best interest and my family's best interest in mind. Trust that they're going to show up authentically. To me, one of the, what's the word? Like the quote unquote worst traits in a friend is someone who's one person with me, one person with another person, and another person with another person, a chameleon.
Yeah.
I want your authentic self. And I want to be around people who are their authentic selves and pretty no bullshit, to be honest.
Yeah. And that one's tough too, because it's like, is that them adapting to the context of which their friendships?
Sure.
And what does that look like? But then again, that doesn't meet your need.
And that's it. That's just it, right?
Yeah.
For some people, that's totally fine.
Yeah.
For me, I'm a really no bullshit person. And so I want to surround myself with people that I don't have to guess, depending on who we're around, who they're going to be.
One clue for me is are they showing curiosity about my life?
Ooh, I love that.
So I had past tense friends that wasn't the case. And granted, I look back at myself as a young age, like teenage years, I wasn't the best friend.
Yeah.
Like, I don't like that part of me that, when I look back at that age, I'm like, oh my God, I was an awful friend. But now that I've grown in life experience, I look back, I'm like, what do I want? And who do I want to be? Knowing that experience I had and what it did to others and like what it felt like for me, if that would happen to me. And so the curiosity is a big one, because I had friends that would only talk about their interests. They made decisions only on what benefited them. They didn't care what I was doing. They didn't care. Even if I tried to insert, because I'm, not going to sit back and let somebody run over me. Even if I inserted it, it didn't matter. Just the subject switched right away. And so I'm like,
valued in that moment.
You're just like, this person does not care. I'm just really a sounding board for their interests. And I'm like, that's great. And maybe that meets a need for them, but I'm not getting my need in this relationship. And this is something that I'm just going to have to, and this also includes my friendship with like in-laws or other relatives, right? Because that's the same thing I'm looking for: curiosity and reciprocity.
With the curiosity piece, and I spoke to this a bit ago, of our personal values don't necessarily have to match, at least in my world of friendship. But is it such that like there's all these topics that we just can't talk about? Or can we get curious? Can we have conversations? To me, that's important. For my friendships, I don't have a ton of time. And so the friendships I keep, I want them to be quality friendships, not about quantity.
Yeah.
Can I have differences of opinion with the people I'm around and it be okay? Can we have deep conversations, philosophical conversations, intellectual conversations? Without that, for me, like, to me, it feels really surface, and I don't find myself wanting to invest in that energy and time.
Yeah.
So finding someone who also values that depth. And if we align on politics, faith, all the things, great. And if we don't, can we talk about it? Can we both be open and curious and not just stuck in our one particular view?
And try to persuade the other to believe.
Oh, those are the most exhausting of friendships. I'm just going to say it.
You bring up a good point. And not all values have to align for it to work, especially if one's open and curious, which is a value too that they would have, right? I value learning new things or something,
Sure.
right? But the other thing too is there must be a core value that exists, in my opinion, that
I agree.
That because there's some values that are like, no way is that I can't even if we don't align on this other stuff, like these are the values I need to align. And it might be one or two, but what are those really important values? And for some, it might be their faith. For some, it might be how they raise their kids.
I think about humanitarian stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like how we talk about people of different racial groups or just people who are different than us.
Mm-hmm.
If someone is bigoted at all or puts anyone down, and you mentioned this earlier, I'm out. Like that's a one and done for me. Yeah. Right. And that speaks to one of our deep values, rooted in our faith, rooted somewhat in our politics. But I can't be around people who toss things like that around. I just can't.
Yeah. And that's what I'm talking about. There's always some core value that we're assessing that has to be matched. The other ones we might be okay with. They might be a little bit more flexible. And that's something that we need to evaluate ourselves. Because if I'm looking about establishing quality friendships, I need to know myself. I need to know what values I'm really looking for that are going to make this work. And maybe, for some like me, I'm just high maintenance because of my values. And I'm
with you in it.
and I'm picky, right? And I'll be working on a little bit more flexibility myself, but it's thinking about who am I and what are the values that are most important to me. Like I want somebody who has integrity. Granted, not 100% of the time. Like you might run the red light when nobody's around at 2 a.m. and it just won't turn.
I'm telling on you.
That might be the case. Something like the integrity one, and then going back to the courteous one, or having respect for humanity, like the homeless example I gave you with the person who was homeless. Like those are big ones for me. And I'm like, if you think you're above another human being, regardless of SES status,
100%,
it bothers me so much. And if you act like that, it says more about your insecurity. And I just can't.
The general respect.
Yes.
Right. I've had those friends, especially Chicago was a big one, especially when we lived in Chicago, when they would go out and quite literally turn their nose up at someone or laugh at them or make fun of them. And that is such cringe behavior for me. Whereas other people can overlook that.
Yeah.
So for everyone who's listening, finding those values for you. Do I have to align perfectly in terms of my faith? No. Ideally I would. My faith is a big part of who I am. Politics, hopefully we align. If we don't, it's okay. But there's some of these deeper values that really matter, even in terms of parenting. The way I treat my kids is very intentional, or at least I try to be. And I see some parents who tell their kids they're annoying or to go away or don't respect their kids in that way. And that is one that really turns me off.
Yeah.
Simply because, one, it's cringy to me to watch parenting like that. But two, I don't want my kids seeing it. Yeah. So it's not just my values for me. It's what kinds of values do I want my kids to witness when we are in relationship with these people?
Yeah. Well, at least your kids will know that they have it better by watching.
Still a terrible mom some days.
Is that a value for yours? For your kids to know how good you are? Just kidding. Yeah. And I think that's what I love about this. This is a great time to explore our values and what's important to us. And they do change with life experience. And I do feel like when we're finding friends, this is the hard part, right? So you have an idea of your value system. Now, how do you find them? And I think one area that's really big is finding a hobby.
Yeah.
And going and doing that and meeting people within that interest, because that speaks to a value system.
And it lays some groundwork.
It does. Yeah. It's something, whether that's trivia night. Oh, we love trivia night. Or you're in some competitive climbing, or you're doing pickleball, the gym that people want to talk to you while they're working out. But
that's my dad at the gym. He talks to everyone. I'm like, Dad, you can't do that.
Here he comes, guys. Everyone put your headphones on.
Him and I literally had to have a conversation about this. He's like, well, everyone's wearing their headphones. And I said, because they don't want to be talked to. Oh, okay. Well, I was talking to this woman. I'm like, Dad, stop talking to people at the gym. They don't come to talk. I digress. But do find those mutual hobbies.
Yeah.
Even with parenting, right? Well, parenting's not a hobby per se. you find connection through other parents.
Yeah.
My daughter's, some of her best friends are now some of my best friends. They're parents, obviously, because we met that way.
Through parenting. Yeah.
Am I friends with all of her best friends' parents? No. She can be friends with some of them. And in meeting their parents, we just don't jive. And that's okay too. But at least gives me like a starting point to meet some people.
Yeah. And that's a big one for parents is to meet that. Couples
School.
who don't have children.
It's a hard limbo state. Out of school, no kids. That's a hard space to meet friends.
Yeah. Yeah, very, very difficult. And that's where the hobbies, if you can engage in things that you have the privilege of not having to watch a child or, raise your child, you can go do intramural sports at night or
even your local university, looking into lectures or classes that they're teaching, or
yeah.
you could CSU, they have the Ramskeller and they do beer brewing classes.
Mm-hmm.
Go to something like that.
Yeah. A cooking class. You might meet other couples in a cooking class.
Mm-hmm.
If you have that time, right? Because you don't have kids, what can you use that time with to prioritize seeking friendships?
Mm-hmm. And really testing them out, right? It's not because we share this one thing, we must be friends, or because we differ on this one thing, we can never be friends.
Yeah.
It's testing them out in different settings.
Yeah.
As people relax, you tend to find their more authentic self. How do we get there?
Yeah. And it does take time to find out, right? Typically first impressions last 2 to 4 years. People can put on a face for a while, but once you've had enough experience with them, you can start seeing the true colors, right? If you start getting a little bit more data. And that's all it is an assessment. Like, is this something that I want to continue with? Yes, I enjoy this. Like, how is it benefiting me?
Mm-hmm.
And also, am I a good friend to them?
Greg, we're at 9 years. Have I made it past the first impression point?
Yes. And somehow we're still around. So that's good.
Praise be.
I still question that all the time. Like, how is she still friends with me?
9 years.
And we went through some
Crazy.
very, I think our friendship started in a very stressful time too.
Yeah, I was thinking of the word toxic.
Yeah.
But that speaks to so much more of it too, right? The way we met. So Greg and I have been friends, I would say, from the jump.
2014.
But the environment in which we were in pulled out parts of us that weren't our best parts.
Yeah.
And was kind of an unhealthy place. And so we've had our own ebbs and flows in our relationship.
Yes.
Of individual growing, moving, kind of figuring out our footing outside of what was a toxic atmosphere.
An oscillation, right? What does that look like? Yeah. And it brings up a good point is who's my friend in stress?
Yes. And can I lean on them? Stress is when you're going to find out who your real needs are and who you need to.
That's why all my friends disappear is when I'm stressed. Well, or maybe or somebody who stress isolates. And so then somebody who doesn't know what's going on with that friend because they haven't communicated feels like they're just distancing. Mm-hmm. Stress is a big factor for that.
Some of my truest friends and some of my friends that I've cut have come out in moments when I was pregnant, because pregnancies are hard for me. And when my mom died. They told me so much about the people around me in those moments of crisis. Yeah. And I hate that it comes to a crisis, but it really does show some of those deeper values I have, where my friends actually align in that spectrum, not just in the daily minutia and going out to the bars, but in the tough moments, where are my people? Yeah.
It makes me think of the value of grace.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I think as you're saying that, I was thinking about that. I was like, how much grace do I give people to be human? I mean, maybe they don't respond the best in the crisis that I was hoping for.
That's good flexibility. You're more flexible than you think you are.
Like I said, I have had to work on myself. But it makes sense. And I would say that unfortunately for me, I don't necessarily maybe give that much grace, depending on who it is. And it might vary, but I think that's a good question to ask ourselves too, because it can't just be one moment or a couple moments too. Like, I mean, I think these are great ones to show data, but is this how they're going to respond all the time? Can I talk to them about what that felt like for me, and also be curious about what was going on for them at that time that might have influenced their response or lack thereof?
Without defensiveness and explosion.
Yeah. And these are healthy conversations, hence healthy friendships, right?
Okay, now here's the tough one. Greg, what if you and your wife meet a couple, or she has a friend, and she loves her friend, but you don't like the partner, or you don't like the friend? How do you sort that out as a couple, right? If my hubby likes someone as a friend and I'm like, nope, how do we balance that out?
It depends on how much I don't like the partner.
Do say more, Greg.
Well, it's just how much they vary from my value system. Like if they're like hardcore political and because my value is like open. Another value of mine is openness, and you can have your belief system, but also be curious, like, right? This could be the way, but no one way is the panacea, right? That's a value system of mine. So how can you be so stuck in one rigid ideology? And if I see that, like I don't feel much room for growth there. So I don't really engage, and I might just allow my wife to have a friendship with the other partner if they connect. But my wife's in a really unique position of herself, which I'll talk about here in a little later. What about for you? What would you do?
We've been in that position. And my husband
with Taylor and I.
My husband's typically a good sport. Like he can get along with quite literally anyone on this planet. And so it's typically like me being friends with a woman and then her partner he doesn't love. But even he's had friends in his life that like I've had to really grit my teeth. Now, that said, Chris and I are really open about who we like in our space, who we don't like, and why. It's not like I just grit my teeth and don't tell my hubby. He does know. And there have been some relationships that I thought were really good for me, or he thought was really good for him. And through feedback to one another, it kind of opened our eyes to some red flags we had missed too. I would never want to restrict my hubby from friends unless they draw out that really like negative, icky part of him that we all have. And he's the same way.
Yeah.
But it's tough. It's tough when you do have a partnership where he gets along with one and I don't with the other, or vice versa. That's a tough one.
Yeah. And typically I'm the partner people don't like, and they have to assess whether.
I mean, your wife is pretty phenomenal.
She's incredible. Yeah. Well, and kind of jump into that is talking about friendships. So here's another unique dynamic that I don't see often, but she has about 3 really, really, really close friends from like early childhood. And their boundaries are very rigid. And their boundaries are very rigid. They don't let a lot of people in, but within their group, it is extremely safe to be imperfect.
Oh, I love that.
They're very curious of each other. There's a lot of reciprocity. They trust one another that if they're not getting their need met, that they can go to the other. And they've established that. And some people, that's what they need, is that little small, tight knit group, and they don't allow much to come in. And that also raises another thought process in the couple context, because it's like, well, then is my wife willing to be friends with this partner of someone that I met? Because she's very content with her friend group. Or if someone's trying to be friends with her, does she explore new friendships? Does she have to look for any friendships, or is she just content with that?
Where she's at.
And there's individuals in that case where they've had these childhood friends and they're not allowing much people in. They're very comfortable. So that's a very interesting phenomenon for me.
Friends are such a complicated thing. We think about it as just a natural, it happens kind of process, but it's so much more nuanced than that. And each one has different sets of boundaries and almost like implicit rules within that group.
Yeah.
Even as I think of my friends, there's same thing. It's 3 other women, and we get together every month, and we were a very close group. And I adore my friendships with them. Like I feel very safe. I can be my whole self. And yet it looks different than some of my other friendships. And it's interesting to see the differences in those, where I'd say all of them are still close, those 3 plus others, but yet it looks very different by person and what we connect on, all that stuff.
Yeah. And I like talking about this particular piece, especially with the dynamics with my wife's friendship group. And then what you're talking about with yours is this idea of, can you be friends with somebody if you're envious of the relationships they have with others?
Ooh.
Because I see that happening of.
You mean like the possessiveness of like.
Not even a possessive way. Like, let's take, for example, you have a friend that you met and you get along with them in one context. This goes back to what we started with about, I can have friends in certain contexts. Do I want them in that context, or do I want to have them transcend other parts of my life? And you have one friend that really is like connecting with you, and that things that they also perceive a stronger connection that you have with your little group. And they want that.
I see what you're saying.
They want to be a part of that, or they want that same attention.
Ooh, it's a tough one. What do you think?
For me, I feel like one, I assess like, why am I jealous of that thing? What does that mean about my friendship with this person?
Mm-hmm.
And the other is this something that I'm willing to be okay with? Like, do I view that as part of the reciprocity?
Mm-hmm.
If they're not willing to put that much effort in that relationship because I want it to look like that, because that's my expectation, then maybe this isn't something I want to continue to pursue.
Mm-hmm.
Because I look at it more of am I jealous of that because that's my expectation? I want this to look like.
Ooh, good question.
Or am I jealous of that because I'm just wanting attention? And not necessarily I want to look like that, but I just want your attention. And then kind of reflecting on that. But in general, going back to my needs and my value systems. And is it okay for my friends to have other friends that they have a stronger connection with than me?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is deeper than anyone probably looks at it.
Excited for them, right? Like I get excited that this sounds weird, that my friends have other friends, because I want people to be in connection. Like one of my deepest hopes as a human is to foster connection in other people.
Mm-hmm.
And so with my friends, my hope is that they have other connections. So can you reframe that jealousy? Can you reframe part of it? Or is it speaking to a greater need of mutuality and reciprocity?
And I look at this come up and be kind of put on its head when one person wants to go do something, the other one's like, I'm actually going to hang out with.
Oof. So
I see this a lot. I see this with my clients, right? I mean, we're using ourselves as examples, but this happens in clients all the time. And one thing is we're not socially connected. How do we connect with people? And these little factors that we've been talking about today come up a lot.
That's interesting to me. To me, that feels, and maybe I'm wrong here. To me, that doesn't feel like, it doesn't feel inclusive. It feels kind of exclusionary. I don't know if that's a real thing.
Well, I guess it depends too. Like, are we looking at it in the sense of, are they willing to give the effort for that relationship? They are for mine.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not a matter of like, I don't want you hanging out with them, but I want that equal space, depending on where you see us, right? This is why friendships are hard. This is why we're always looking at them and evaluating them and trying to determine if this is somebody I want to be. And is this going to be too much work for me? And a lot of friendships develop out of, I would say, what's the word I'm looking for? Just ease of access.
Convenience,
right? Oh, they go to the same school as my child. Yeah, convenience. Oh, we all go to the same, X, so let's just be friends. But when you really dig down into it, and the things we're talking about, the value systems and things like that, is that something you see long term? And how can we be more intentional about maybe finding the friendships that we're looking for?
Which again can be so hard. If you're struggling with friendships, you're not alone. I should be really clear. Friendships as adults is so much more nuanced than it is as kids. And they're much more difficult to access than they are as kids.
Yeah.
Kids we see, especially like in elementary and middle school, one week you like each other, the next week you don't, and you kind of switch it up. Adults, it's not that fluid, not in the same way.
Yeah.
And we don't have as much access, like general access to friendships.
Yeah. And this
so be gentle with yourself if you're struggling. And
this is where I see like the psychology of in-group and out-group bias, right? So you get a friend, this kind of goes back a little bit to what we were just talking about. Is you get a friend and like, now we're in the in group. Who else are you willing to include? And are you a friend that doesn't feel like you're in the in group? Oof. There's just a lot of at play here. And it's really important, hence why we're talking about it, to just evaluate what those look like, because they can, as you said, like bring out the part of your husband that you don't like. And just evaluating, what are they doing for me? Are they aligning with the values that are really, really important to me that I actually need some consistency on?
Friendships also, to me, are important for romantic partnerships because it kind of helps to mitigate some of that codependency. My husband can't be my everything. He can't be my lover, my co-parent, my best friend, my only friend.
That's not what Disney tells us.
Oh, golly. We expect our partner to be everything. And that sounds really lovely, but your partner can't be your everything. They can't. Yeah. And so finding friends can help kind of soften that load on our partner, as well as help us grow as a human, help us find joy, boost our oxytocin, endorphins, things like this. So friendships, while they're hard to find, I'm a huge advocate that everyone should have a friend group and a support group.
Yeah. And you're talking about like a friendship outside of your current relationship where it's independent of your partner, right? So you have your own identity outside your relationship.
100%.
And then there's also another layer, which is how do we find friends as a couple, as a dyad? which is even hard because, like, as you talked about earlier, we both gotta like both partners.
And when you find that couple, you're like, oh, that's such gold.
Yeah. And this is where the little in group comes. We're in group, we're doing all this stuff, and then like your other friends are like, wait, what's going on? Are we a part of this? Or like you're hanging out with all of them? And this is where it's like balancing. Like, who are you as a friend?
Mm-hmm. It's tough.
Yeah.
I even reflect on my own journey as a friend, and it has ebbed and flowed in so many ways over the last, well, forever, but especially the last 5-10 years.
Yeah.
I've had moments where I've been a really good friend and moments where I have been a real shitty friend. And how do I reflect on that and try to grow from that process too?
Yeah. And some friends are seasonal, seasonal part of life, where you're at in your life, and that's okay. Some of them will be through many seasons.
I think about a train, right? The passengers on the train. Some people get on, some people get off. Some people ride it to the very end.
Yeah. It's a good analogy. Yeah.
And that's okay. Well, this has been Relationships Inside Out, where we talked about friendships and how freaking hard it is as an adult to have a friend. If anyone has any questions, thoughts, topic suggestions, feel free to email us at relationshipsinsideout@gmail.com. We look forward to chatting with you next time.
Thanks.